Baldur's Gate 3 just became one of the most popular RPGs in the world. And that's not just me making stuff up. That's according to the numbers. And the numbers never lie. There is a very good reason why this happened. Some might attribute it to the creative combat, which unfortunately we won't talk too much about in this video. Yes, the combat is amazing, but since it is turn-based, it will not be everyone's cup of tea. And to be fair, the combat is not the reason why you buy this game. Then there are others who like the fact that this game is a complete package without any microtransactions. But to me, this is perhaps the best story-driven game I have ever played in my entire life. It is not an RPG. It is far more than what an RPG is. It is an RPG from the 70s, also known as D&D or Dungeons and Dragons. That's right, this game essentially replicates a D&D session one-to-one. You're free to do absolutely anything you want at any point, and the game will always reflect it from the narrative side. It is unbelievable just how much freedom the game gives you. So yes, get ready for the fact that this is just one massive video that will try to sell you on this game. It all begins with the character creation. One might expect choosing a class and a race, you choose your appearance and you wander off into the world. No, this is a D&D, a genre based around the absolute control over your character. So here you choose your race, which has its own sub-races, each with their special attributes and unique abilities. Then you pick a class, a subclass from the overarching branch, which will result in the role you want to play. Then you are given a set of attribute points, which are sorted according to recommendations. Of course, you have the absolute control, so you can swap them around however you want. And then you get into the customization. Although there are no sliders, you're gonna be surprised by how deep it actually is. Based on your race, you pick your body type, your gender, your genitals, from a wide variety I might add.
I've got penis options.
Your voice, and then you go into the base appearance of your character. And if you don't like the appearance options of your sub-race, you always have the option to also get the appearances from all the other sub-races. For example, none of the races really spoke to me, so I became a holy dragon paladin of the vengeance kind. I picked a white dragon for the lore and the ability, but I didn't like the pale colors, so I went for one of the silver kinds instead. This customization is insane. And then, 18 hours later, when you are done, you also get to make your guardian. What's also cool is that instead of just making your own character, you can also just choose and play as one of the already existing characters in the story. That's right, normally you would just recruit them on your adventures. But you also have the option to just possess that character with their traits, with their background, and you play through the story from their perspective. I cannot believe this game exists. So finally, after this, we leave the character creation, and we are led out to walk into the world, which is when you'll face this. Now, let's talk about it for a second. First of all, it all makes sense when you realize that this game has been in development for about 10 years. It came from times when this kind of UI was totally normal. Old school RPGs gave you a million buttons and they enjoyed watching you try to figure out what all of them do. On top of that, the tutorials were kept at the absolute minimum. That way, exploring all the possibilities is part of the fun. In this way, the game absolutely reflects the old school way of thinking too. Besides me trying to figure out how the combat itself works, which to be fair, yes, for the first few hours you will be absolutely lost. But then, it felt absolutely incredible to just discover stuff. To D&D veterans, it should be absolutely obvious that you should be sneaking around, lighting up torches with fire spells, or pickpocketing people whenever possible. But to me, a person who has never played a D&D in his life, it felt incredible just to discover that I have a shove button, so I can sneak behind goblins and shove them off of the cliff without even being in combat. Which, by the way, yes, you can always use all of your toolkits at any time, even if you are not in combat. And soon after that, I started jumping into areas which I thought were blocked off, sneaking around traps, or purposefully triggering traps with spells. The moment the basic mechanics click in, you'll realize just how open this game is. One of my favorite clips on the internet is the part where you are supposed to get into a fortress, where you could just walk in through the main gate, or you could sneak in through the sewers, or you can stack 45 crates on top of each other, then climb on top and use the transportation arrow to get on top of the walls. During my adventures, it felt really cool when I found a crypt that had a massive trap in the middle of the main room. Whenever I triggered it, everything just exploded. I had the option to be smart and try to disable the trap, or I could lead my party outside, purposefully trigger the trap, and then shoot an arrow to hit the trigger and disable everything. I didn't know it would work, but it did. Simply said, without spoiling possibilities, this freedom of choice and expression through gameplay is absolutely unmatched by anything I have ever played. Which is why it's so awesome to see that things get even better during the conversations. You see, over the decades of playing RPG games, people cracked the code. Conversation systems in RPGs are all about the illusion of choice. The game may give you options and you may choose what you want to say, but the outcome of the story usually remains the same. However, the point of the illusion is that sometimes, in rare cases, what you say actually alters the story. Some games might give you plenty of choices and still none of them matter. Other games, such as Mass Effect, have the 80-20 split, where 80% of the conversations don't matter and they just serve to give you story, but the remaining 20% of the conversations alter the story. And even though it sounds low, it's still pretty good, because even though 80% of the conversations don't matter, you are still treating them as important parts of the story, because you don't know which conversations will be part of the 20%. But then, Baldur's Gate marches in. From personal experience, I want to say that about 50% of the conversations don't matter. But honestly, it doesn't feel that way. The conversations either just go on its own, or it gives you dialogue options. And when it gives you dialogue options, it feels like it always changes the story. And that's because you get special dialogue options based on your race, your class, your attributes, and even your individual stats. Not to mention that you have special traits that can help you intimidate people, lie, or charm them. And of course, all of that is based on dice rolls. More on those in just a moment. The point is, it feels like literally every other conversation is branching out the story, which would also have to mean that every player will have their own unique playthrough, which is something the devs confirmed should be possible. Yes, the devs confirmed that it simply should be impossible to experience everything. There are simply so many choices affecting so many characters that it would take dozens of playthroughs to experience everything. My favorite part of this are all the side characters. Normally, you would expect only the main characters to have a major story, and around them you would find generic NPCs that just stand around to fill up the crowd. Well, Baldur's Gate doesn't have that. You do have some generic NPCs, but literally every NPC can be interacted with, and every one of them will return a line of dialogue that will give you context for their story. I'm starting to understand why it took 10 years to build this game, but that's when the devs dropped a very interesting number. Apparently, this game has 173 hours of cinematics. Or to quote them, that's more than all seasons of Game of Thrones combined. Now, I'm pretty sure that by pure technicality they meant cutscenes, not cinematics. Cinematics should be fully pre-rendered, but cutscenes are cut scenes in the game using your character. But still, that's insane! But not as insane as the next interesting fact. Everything is voiced. How do I know? This game is 120 gigabytes. Audio compression is a bitch. Yes, unless you find a note or a book that you can read, literally every line of dialogue is voiced. And if something is not voiced, it is narrated by a narrator.
You watch speechless as the cub begins to eat his mother.
From the main characters to the side characters who are just standing there. They may not be important, but if you talk to them, you will get a voiced reply. Some unnamed games should be taking notes here, because the immersion Baldur's Gate is pulling off is simply unimaginable. And again, it's all tied to the fact that even when it comes to the conversations, you can do anything and you can end up in any scenarios. And the best proof of this is that one viral clip. I'm never gonna look at bears the same way again. Also, does anybody know the guy who recorded that one bear sound that's used in literally every game ever made? I don't think he ever thought it would be used in this context. Anyway, when this clip first emerged, a lot of people had a lot of opinions. Mainly, you know, by technicality, that's bestiality, which is illegal. Maybe they shouldn't be promoting it in their game. Just like murder, drugs and tax evasion, but all of those are in our games too. So you know what? Let's avoid that topic for today. If anything, that scene is just dark humor. That's really what it is. It's not too far from the comedy of South Park. Not everyone is gonna like it, but it's just a really stupid joke that shows you that anything can happen in this game. And oh boy, can people really do anything in this game. Once you combine the interactive gameplay with the dialogue system, you'll start going into some crazy places. You might think that you are fairly limited by the RPG elements. Yes, you have the dialogue options, which, as I mentioned, change the story. But remember, this game is replicating D&D 1-to-1, which means that everything is interactive and therefore nothing has boundaries. So if you're talking to someone you don't like, you always, and I mean always, have the attack button just sitting there. But this is where you might run into the best part of this game: dice checks. Their purpose is simple. They diversify your story, which is an incredibly underrated feature. In something like Mass Effect, when you play a good guy, you get good guy points, and when you play a bad guy, you get bad guy points. And then when you get to a crossroad, you unlock choices based on those points. With that system, you can always guarantee the outcome if you know what you are doing. But here, the story is altered by chances. The way it works is that anytime you decide to alter the story, you have to go through a dice check. The game gives you a number and you roll a dice to see if you succeed. Depending on how difficult of a task you are doing, that number may be higher or lower. But things get a lot more interesting when you realize that your traits also give you extra points for your dice. Having high intellect may give you +2 on arguments. Having high strength will give you bonus points towards intimidation. But on top of that, depending on who's in your party, you may get extra buffs that give you even more points. And yes, eventually you will find tasks so difficult that you can't even hit them naturally with your dice. For example, you might find a 25 intellect check. So since your dice can only roll up to 20, you need to roll high but also have enough bonuses to reach it. Of course, this awesome system also has a sketchy side. Before every roll, you can save, and then if you fail, you can just load the previous save. Some people see this as scammy, but to be honest, this is a single-player game. Just play it however you want. Personally, I like to play the game with the hand I'm dealt, because this game does have a failsafe mechanic to compensate. You see, once you pick the class and the race of your character, it is in your interest to make choices in the role of that character, by making role-accurate decisions. For example, if you are a truly just paladin, the game will give you inspiration points, which can be spent to re-roll dice if you fail. So if it so happens that you critically fail on a dice check of 3, you can spend your inspiration points instead of just reloading a previous save. But again, just remember that you can play this game however you want. Freedom is truly the main mechanic of this game. But that's really all I wanted to talk about today. There were still plenty of things we didn't have time to touch on, such as rolling critical fails, doing initiation checks, or rolling to see if your character can notice a trap, not to mention combat. Honestly, I didn't really want to talk about it because it is fun, but if you don't like it and you are not a fan of turn-based combat, you can just tune it down and enjoy the game for the story, because that's where most of the fun is. It is in the weaving of the story. If anything, it is incredible to see the success of Baldur's Gate 3. Apparently, the game is so good that people started giving it low reviews because they thought the score was so high it looked suspicious. I wish I was making it up. And yes, we also didn't talk about all the adult scenes, of which I've been told there is a lot. And people already started making sketchy mods to help them with their fantasy. Those people wouldn't last a day in Mass Effect.